Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Lauren Gibbons. I'm a reporter at MLive, and I am here today with several guests to talk to us about Michigan's 10-cent bottle deposit law. We're following up on the documentary that MLive released last week about this law and about some of the suggestions that have been made to potentially change it over the years, and talk a little bit about some of the feedback that readers gave to us about their experiences with the law. If you haven't watched the video yet, it's great. There's going to be a link to it in the comments below, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about the law itself, about the documentary. Feel free to pop those in the comments as well here. But without further ado, I'll introduce our guests today. So we have Conan Smith here with us. He's the president and CEO of the Michigan Environmental Council. We also have Shayna Schupan Barry, the director of governmental affairs and strategic partnerships at Schupan and Sons Incorporated. And we have Spencer Nevins, the president of the Michigan Beer and Wine Wholesalers Association. So thank you all so much for being here and for initially agreeing to participate in the original project, and now for taking some time out of your days to discuss it today. So I guess I'll start here. One of the biggest responses from our video, a lot of people that we spoke with and a lot of the comments that we got was about universal redemption and potentially having stores bringing back any returnable containers, whether or not they sell those in the first place. That's been suggested as a possibility before. There's been some legislation introduced to try and put a provision for universal redemption at larger retailers. And I guess I'd love to hear from y'all. Spencer, if you could start us off here. If would universal redemption be possible in Michigan, and how would that change the current bottle bill system?
Sure. Thanks for the question. And it's been fun to participate in this, this whole series so far. Universal debt redemption would certainly be a positive for consumers, and it would help drive back our return rate, which are things that the Michigan Beer and Wine Wholesalers Association supports. It's all in how you do it. We know that there's a lot of cost in the system right now. Universal redemption may or may not add some cost depending on how it's set up. It's something we're taking a look at right now. But the basic concept, right, is consumers could take stuff back to the stores, regardless of whether that store sold it or not. And there may be a few tweaks and things you have to look in there when you're talking about alcohol versus non-alcohol, some things like that add cost. Because, beer and wine distributors may not be going to every store if that store doesn't have a license. So you're adding a lot of cost if you make it universal across all types. But if you look at a licensed location taking everything back and maybe a licensed location not taking back the alcohol, you're not adding as much cost. It's a lot easier, but you're still really getting a lot more access and ease of return for the consumer. And when you look at the original bottle bill, it actually says right in it that we have to have a convenient way for consumers to return their containers, and this would certainly make it more convenient.
And would anyone else on our panel like to weigh in on that particular question? Or
Shayna, I'm really kind of curious from the technical side of it. Like, how do you manage the diversity if we have universal redemption? Is that feasible in your industry?
Well, I mean, I think obviously with the RVMs, the reverse vending machines capabilities, as long as we still know which products are going in and out. I don't think from our side, it's still the same bottles and cans, however they're coming back. I think the complication is more through the distributor network and the retailers and their communication on who's getting the dimes, who's getting the credits, who's paying for the recycling. I think that's where a lot of that complication comes in.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of the logistical is getting all the RVMs programmed. For soft drink, and I know they don't have a representative on this panel today, but for soft drink, it's more statewide. Your Coke distributor, pretty much, as I understand it, you've got one that's doing the Lower Peninsula, one that's doing the Upper. It's pretty easy to program those machines to know who's a container. For alcohol, where suppliers set up territories for their distributors, it gets much more complex. However, with UBCR, which is a partnership we have with Shayna's company, Schupan, and Tamra, and all the RVMs, we have ways to program all those machines. It'll just take some time to get them all programmed for every territory that will handle those dimes and make sure the retailer's getting their dime and the correct distributors being billed. It can be done. It just would take some time.
One of the challenges that was raised in the video too, Dave Castor from Party World and Comstock Park was part of the video. And he mentioned for small retailers, some of these challenges can be really burdensome, right? Like they're doing it by hand. So if we want that universal redemption system to work, we've got to figure out, can we get more of these reverse vending machines distributed to smaller retailers, or is there a way to even exempt smaller retailers possibly from the system so that you're not, Spencer's team doesn't have to go to all these millions of little stores? We got to get really creative about the solutions if we want to see some of these convenience improvements too.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And Shayna mentioned the reverse vending machines, which was something that a lot of our readers brought up in response to this project. The machines in grocery stores that you feed the cans into to get those slips. A lot of people, said it takes a lot of time, and they feel like a lot of their bottles and cans get rejected, even if it's legitimate, or they have troubles with those things. And I guess Shayna, could you tell us a little bit more about why those machines are an important part of the bottle return system, and if there's any way that Michigan could potentially switch to a system that, like other states have, where cans could be measured by some other means, like weight?
Okay. Well, really the reverse vending machines have let this system evolve into a much more efficient system, so that, people, like where it used to be, everyone was like Party World, right? Everyone separating, a lot more labor intensive before the reverse vending machines came in. There was more fraud because it was harder to identify, each individual container, or it was bags of containers for how many are in there, who they belong to. And this also created the environment for the retailers and the distributors to come together to make it more efficient for both of them, and have that have that information of knowing that it, less fraud and things like that. And then allowing, the more things come through the store, they're consolidated behind the reverse vending machines. It's already sorted into aluminum, glass, and PET and plastic. And then that way, when you go to pick it up, it's much more efficient to have these containers with, hundreds and hundreds of crushed already bottles and cans to be able to transport, instead of, we say it's kind of like transporting air when you just have loose bags of material. And then keeping that out of the distributors' back warehouses, reducing that number. Really helped. So it really allowed the evolution and the efficiencies of the system, the reverse vending machine. And there are continuous improvements, right? The reverse vending machines, Tamra is a partner in this, in UBCR logistics, and they're continuously looking at new things around the world. There are some other systems that are starting to be used. So we do think, making it more convenient for the retailers is a huge part of the system that isn't a part of the improvement. And the more we can move forward and spend money, if the retailers have the funds to do this, or the distributors, or the whole infrastructure has more funds to, in the system, then they're more able to, to spend it on improving the system and making it more convenient for their consumers.
Yeah, let's not forget, like the convenience to the consumer is a big part of that reverse vending machine model. I remember as a kid, going in and doing a Boy Scout run and like collecting thousands of cans and then having to count them by hand at a store, right? That's thank goodness we've got some automation there, and the machines that we've seen in use around the world include ones that are being modeled right now where you can dump a bag of cans in the top as opposed to having to do it one can at a time. Those kinds of advancements in technology are going to make this whole system more convenient and easier for everyone. But it also demands a lot of responsibility on the side of the consumer as well. Like when you talk about folks whose bottles get rejected, you got to also ask, hey, is that a beer bottle where you peeled half the label off and you got the barcode so it doesn't know where to put that anymore? Stuff like that. Like it's a partnership, and the machines make that partnership easier.
I would agree. It's a partnership, and it's a theme that's kind of already come up a few times. Investment and money. The system is designed. It's supposed to be designed to be convenient for the consumer. The initial requirements on it are kind of the horror stories you're hearing about right now, where you had to wait in line with your containers in the plastic or paper bags because retailers didn't want them in plastic, and you hand sorted them. And that's really all the bottle bill requires. And so when you look at what retailers have done and what distributors have done, RVMs are not required by the bottle bill. It's something the industry took on the cost of, put them in there themselves, paid for to make the bottle better. It's something distributors accepting those commingled containers, no longer having control of making sure that what they were getting back was theirs, was something that distributors had to do. There's been a lot of costs that have been undertaken by retailers and distributors to try to make this as convenient as possible. And as you look at new types of RVMs, the one just discussed just now, where you're dumping in from the top, that would require retailers obviously to switch out something they've all paid for themselves, not inexpensively, to make it more convenient. And the idea of a partnership, Conan, I agree 100%, but that partnership it's a partnership between consumers who are paying this dime and believing there's going to be a convenient way to take it back and that they're going to get it back, and the retailers and the distributors, and I would suggest the state, to make sure that we have a system where we look at it as partners. We try to make it convenient. We try to control the costs so we can continue to make it better, for everyone moving forward. We'd love, but I also agree, Cody, right? You get containers, they've drank half the container, but they want to put it through the machine. Well, it's going to get rejected. It's got to be an empty container in order to be eligible for return. And it's got to have the label on it. And and then there's also confusion out there on, what type of containers that you really did pay the deposit on. And do you have a deposit coming back? Alcoholic ciders. Everyone they might be getting, now that they've been popular for a while, they might be getting used to it, but you don't pay a deposit on an alcoholic cider. So when you take your cider that you're thinking of as a beer or whatever else, and it's getting rejected, it's because there was no deposit. And there's things we can do with investment to address that for consumers as well.
Yeah, those are all great points. And, I know pretty much everyone in Michigan has probably had the experience where they're trying to take back that can that got a little too crushed, or the one that they ripped the label half off. So those are definitely all great points and things that people should keep in mind when they're collecting and bringing them back to the machines. And Spencer, you kind of started to go into another topic that a lot of our commenters have been bringing up, supporting the idea of potentially expanding the bottle law to cover additional beverages that, weren't around or weren't necessarily popular in 1976 when this was passed. Water bottles, sports drinks, the ciders, for example. So there's been, some proposals put out there to expand that deposit to include non-carbonated beverages, except for milk containers. And I'd love to hear, a little bit from each of you. Would this help improve the recycling rate? Would the system that Michigan currently has be able to handle such an expansion of this law?
Well, I'll go first. I think if you look at what we just experienced, we're still going through this pandemic, but when we had the bottle rooms shut down, and Shayna is going to be very, very familiar with this as well. When those reopened after, I can't remember how long they were shut down, a few months, we were trying to return, 6 months worth of containers in a 2-month period. And consumers saw what happens, right? So those containers are making it back to Schupan, they're making it back to the UBCR facility or my members' facilities, and we're running our equipment 7 hours a day, 7 days a week, 24 hours, trying to get all these containers cleaned, crushed, shredded, getting ready to go off to the recyclers, but you can only run it so fast. And as that starts to bog down, then all of a sudden it starts to sit into retailers longer. And as it sits into retailers longer, pretty soon retailers can't accept from the consumer, and you have this frustration. So the system is right now what it is. It's as big as it is. It's been paid for. It's continuing to be operated by distributors and retailers. But the concept of now doubling the amount of volume, well, we just saw what happens when we went up by 40%. We couldn't keep up. You want to double it, you're not going to be able to keep up, and you're actually going to do harm to the bottle bill when the frustration from consumers builds. So we've been saying all along, Michigan Beer and Wine Wholesalers Association, I believe, is the only association that has come out and said, hey, we're willing to discuss expansion. My members aren't 100% uniform on it, but we've got a majority of members who think expansion can be done. Now, we can only talk about the products we handle, but it's going to require investment. And you can't do the expansion before you do the investment because the system's not there. You've got to do the investment to build the system up so that when we do go live with, say, if you ever want to put it on wine or something like that, the system can take it back and the consumer can continue to have a positive experience. If we do it the other way, we give that consumer a negative experience. They feel like we violated that partnership, right? You took my dime, but you're not making it easy for me to return it. And that's a violation of what we agreed to or what happened back in 1976 when this was passed. And so you need to invest and build that system up, and then you can expand. That's the view of the Michigan Beer and Wine Wholesalers Association.
Yeah, from the Environmental Council perspective, we're right on board with that. Expansion certainly is possible. It's one way that we can continue to have the most effective recycling system for bottles in the nation. But we have to do it in a planful way. And it's going to be costly to do that. It's going to take new kinds of machines. It's going to take consumer behavior training. It's whole systems have to be developed, and those don't happen overnight, and they don't happen without investment from somewhere. So yeah, let's do it, but let's be thoughtful about it, and let's figure out how we do it with this grand partnership that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I would say on the processing side of the materials, we are continuing to invest in the infrastructure and build it. And, as you have more volume, usually you have more efficiency, right? So that's the simple side of it. But where the biggest, it's the consumer facing sides, the retailers, making sure, there is the capacity there to handle everything and the money to help them get there. And then also being careful in the legislation of, the recyclability of every can and bottle. Just because it says it's recyclable, you have to be very careful, because we don't want to. We have this clean stream of, what we know we're getting, and we don't want to contaminate what we're already, the good things, the high quality we have going. So we just have to be careful. There's not, very odd manufactured, material coming into the bottle bill system.
And there are social impacts too that we have to be thoughtful about, especially around water bottles. With the challenges we're facing in Benton Harbor and have faced in Flint, and the affordability of water challenges that we have in the city of Detroit, there are a lot of people in Michigan, thousands, tens of thousands of residents who are reliant on bottled water for their main drinking water source, and sometimes for cooking and bathing as well. That's a tragedy, and it should never be the case. But the fact that it is real. And adding a bottle deposit on top of what is maybe a 9-cent bottle of water could be prohibitive in some ways for some people. And we want to be smart about that in the public policy as well. Make sure that people who are reliant on bottled water are not disproportionately impacted by expansion of a good system like this.
Absolutely.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and a couple of you mentioned COVID-19 and the impact that it had in 2020 on this whole system. Everyone was kind of feeling the effects of that from the consumer on up. And could you talk a little bit about where we're at now? Has the system recovered from this stoppage last year, or are we still feeling the effects of that?
Well, from the distributor side, and I'll let Shayna weigh in too. We're staring at each other here, trying to decide who's going to go first. We haven't recovered, not because the system's not ready to recover. We haven't recovered because, unfortunately, there are locations, retail locations, that should be taking containers back who are still relying on that shutdown, claiming they can't take containers back. And we know that they've been notified. I know that the Attorney General, Nessel, has been doing a great job trying to reach out to these retailers when she finds out about them and saying, hey, you got to start taking containers back. But a retailer has to take at least $25 back from a consumer per day, right? From every consumer per day. That's the floor of what they have to take back. They can go much higher, and many of our retailers do. But you have a lot of retailers saying, oh, we'll take back $5. And I know in the city of Detroit, there's retailers that are saying, oh, we'll take back $3 worth. Or they have signs hanging up, even in East Lansing where I live, that say, oh, due to the pandemic, our bottle room's still closed, or due to this governor's order, our bottle room's still closed. We've got to get those open because not every consumer has access to a Meijer or to a Walmart or to a large convenience store who is open. A lot of them are reliant on gas stations. If you're in a really rural area or certain urban areas, there are not a lot of good options for places to take your containers back. You're dealing with small retailers, gas stations, and a lot of those are not open yet. They're not taking the containers, and that's a big press we have to do to get recovered from the pandemic, but also to move forward into the future with making sure we're doing right by the consumer and making it convenient for them to return their containers. That's something that's got to continue to be looked at.
Yeah, I'm all for the enforcement side of this as well, and I've really appreciated how the industry has stepped up to declare to retailers that they need to be open and that that's part of the system that they're failing us on. That's definitely the case, and it's true. Simultaneously, we need to be aware that the reason that a number of these places aren't opening is the resistance that was sort of evidenced in the video. That it is a pain for these guys in these smaller locations, and so let's be aware of that as we think about opportunities to improve the bottle bill. Like we know it's tough. What are the things that we can put in place that make it easier? Like providing some funding support for the expansion of reverse vending machines to some of these locations. Yeah. Those are challenges that we should not ignore, right? Let's figure them out. Let's hear them and solve them.
The state has bought reverse vending machines for retailers in the past. 2008, I believe it was, when we were trying to shut down foreign containers, right? Containers bought in other states that were being brought across the border that were really messing with our system. We needed more technology in those machines, and the state actually paid to have the technology added to machines or bought new machines for retailers. And I do agree, one of the best ways to make things easier for consumers and our smaller retailers, and quite frankly, for distributors and everyone else, the more RVMs you get, the more integrity you have in the system, the quicker they can be picked up, the faster you can look at expanding. Like we've already mentioned, we have a third-party pickup between soft drink, beer and wine distributors and a company called UBCR, which is a partnership between Schupan and Tomra. We pick up 60% of the containers through that system. It's the most efficient, cleanest, best-run system in the country. But the problem is you need an RVM to be able to communicate with, and that's what brings the integrity into the system. And a lot of our small retailers don't have them. And, you'd like to look at, well, how can we exempt some small retailers out to help them? But if you do that, those areas I just talked about that don't have large retailers, suddenly there's nowhere for them to go. Right. So the answer really is, I agree, Conan, 100%. It's expansion of RVMs into more and more stores so that we can expand the best pickup option, I think, in the country, the UBCR option. We can expand it to more people.
I'm curious from you guys, from Spencer, Shayna, you guys. So Shayna, you said it's sort of like transporting air, right? If the bottle isn't crushed, I gotta imagine that just takes up a ton of space in trucks. It's a huge inefficiency if you don't have these machines in place to do that crushing.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and that's why the bigger retailers now, that 60% of that volume is coming back through UBCR in a very efficient way because, we've designed this whole system through this partnership to be the most efficient and the least footprint environmentally and all these things. We've made major steps to get there. And with the pandemic, that is what we've seen. Also, more people going back to the larger retailers if they're available, because it's easier for them, right? They have the newer machines and things like that. So it has made those parts of the system more efficient, and the other side probably less efficient, right? Because it's harder and more frustrating for the consumers, which is a concern of all of ours, right? They deserve to be able to get their money back. That's part of the deal that the state has made with the bottle bill.
The amount of money that distributor organizations like my members spend, and Shayna and I have talked about this many times in the past, the stuff that we get picked up by UBCR is, it is so much less expensive to pick it up through UBCR. So 60% is not where the greatest majority of our cost comes from. Our greatest majority comes from that 40%, where you have to try to run in these side load box cars, to into these spots to pick these containers up. They're not crushed. They're not, they're in bags, they're in boxes. It's way more expensive. Then we have to take them back. Every individual distributor is taking it back to their own place to do all the washing, crushing, shredding, whatever it may be, depending on the commodity type. That's a huge cost to the system. Whereas once it's going through UBCR, our retailers agree to be UBCR is a free program to the retailers. It's paid for 100% by beer and wine distributors and soft drink companies. And those retailers agree to crush at a certain rate. There's a compaction rate on all those containers. They agree to meet. The blue little boxes you might see sometimes in those back rooms, those are called Gaylords. Those are supplied by us, and they are measured to perfectly fit inside the trailers that UBCR is running, so we can get them totally maximum. Everything's about maximizing the amount of space to get as many containers and to basically transport as little of air as possible. But again, our retailers agree to do it. Most of them do a great job. When they're not, we have calls that we work on it. Those bins are perfect, and the retailers have to store them inside because in the winter, if all of a sudden they've got ice on the bottom of them, now they don't fit in the trucks. I mean, so it is really a great partnership, but it is, when everyone's pulling in the same direction, it works wonderfully.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I want to make sure that we touch on how this corresponds with recycling of other materials in Michigan, because a lot of our readers and viewers, especially last year during the pandemic, they said, well, what's the issue with putting our empties in curbside recycling? They didn't want to keep them sitting around. A lot of people were just, putting those into the regular recycling system to get them out of the house. And Shayna, maybe we can start with you here. Could you talk a little bit about the differences between how bottles and cans that are returned through the bottle bill system are processed versus, the regular curbside recycling process?
Sure. I mean, we always say that, we believe the bottle bill creates the most efficient, highest quality material. And that's one of the biggest thing about keeping things separate, right? When we keep the aluminum, the plastic, and the glass separate from the cardboard and from other, who knows what goes in, sometimes curbside bins, unfortunately, it keeps it extremely clean. It keeps the value. And then it's just more efficient. It doesn't have to go through multiple recycling processes. It literally goes from the back of those RVMs or from the distributors to our facility to a mill that is melting it or whatever, making it right back into bottles and cans, and not downcycling it, which sometimes have, curbside material. There is a degree of loss, right, from when you're breaking things apart. And then in the bottle bill states, there's only 10 bottle bill states right now. It's an 80 to 90% return rate, right, with the incentive of the money and the consumers participating. And that clean material is, the majority of what's getting back into bottles and cans right now of the country. In curbside states, it's more like a 30% return rate for those bottles and cans. a lot of them do end up in landfills, or once they go through a MRF, depending on the technology and the type of MRF, a lot of times then it has to go to a second processor and be broken, like a bale of aluminum maybe has to be broken again to pick out the extra cardboard or the other things in it. Then we say it's the glass that is picked up through the bottle bill in states does get recycled back into clean glass. Glass in a curbside is a very difficult commodity. It's a low value commodity. It's very heavy. It breaks. It ruins a lot of the other good recyclables, the cardboard, or gets stuck in things. And a lot of times the glass ends up just being mostly maybe downcycled or not recycled at all. So we feel like that's one of the things the bottle bill really helps, that we are doing this process and keeping it out of the MRFs and keeping it out of the other curbside material, so that can contain its higher value.
Mm-hmm. And Conan, could you talk a little bit about, as I think you have even said on this call and in the initial documentary, the participation in bottle bill recycling is typically a lot higher than curbside generally. And Conan, could you talk about some of the factors that go into that, and why the overall recycling rate is a lot lower than the bottles and cans participation?
Well, when it comes to the bottle and can side of it, let's remember that we've intentionally designed an excellent, near perfect system that, we've created an incentive for the consumer to participate. There's an economic model for the return of those materials. There are systems in place that make that efficient and effective. That's the kind of thing we want for all of the materials, for all of the products, right? Like we want to see that circular economy generate so that it makes good economic sense to put that recovered material back into play somewhere else in the manufacturing cycle. Outside of the bottle bill system, we struggle with those markets, right? Like we don't know exactly what we're going to do with every kind of plastic. Many of the plastics out there that have the recycle symbol on them aren't actually recyclable plastics, for example. So we don't have the right economic systems in place, the right market systems in place. And even when we do, Michigan has an abysmal record of investing in recycling facilities, systems, and programs. And so we spend, I think, Spencer, you've commented about this, we spend $15 million a year on recycling systems through state government, which is maybe a quarter of what Beer and Wine Wholesalers spends picking stuff up just through the bottle bill. So, we could do a lot better as a community in investing in comprehensive recycling at the curbside. But we also need to make sure that there's a place for those materials to go to get back into the manufacturing stream.
It's sad, we're in this great state with environmental resources, and we're a tourist destination, and we're an outdoor recreation, and we talk a lot, but we get very little action. And curbside recycling is great, but how many communities actually have it? Where is it really available for people? And what's people's commitment to it? One of the great things about the bottle bill, and it's why when I hear people talk in other states, well, there's a regional redemption center. Yeah, well, they got a lower return rate than us. Why? Because the regional redemption center that someone's got to make a special trip to is not as good as, hey, I'm off to the grocery store. Where's that bag of cans? Convenience, right? So if you don't have curbside recycling, now you're asking the consumer, and the consumer's proven it time and time again. Not everybody, obviously. There are committed people that take the time to separate their stuff and make the weekend trip down to the local place where they can recycle, and they do it. A lot of people don't. It's going in the garbage. I'm not taking that time. So if you don't have curbside recycling, then we basically have no recycling unless a consumer wants to take the time and energy and effort to find a spot that they can go to return it. And a lot of consumers don't. It has to be easier, more convenient, and I think that's why what Conan's saying about if you could replicate this system for more things, it is the best system, but you got to have an appetite and you got to have a desire to do it. And I think we've shown, Schupans have shown, and the Beer and Wine Wholesalers have shown, and the Michigan soft drink companies have shown And our retailers have shown, hey, if we can do it, we've shown you how to do it, and there is a model there.
One of the most gratifying things about working in this space as we discuss opportunities for modernizing the bottle bill is every single person that I've talked to has said, this thing serves our environmental value really well. It may not work perfectly. We may need to fix it in over here or over there. But when it really speaks to that environmental ethic that all of us have in Michigan. Like, we want to keep the litter out of the roadways and out of our streams. We want to keep it off our beaches, and we've got a system that's been doing that pretty well for 40 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of wind things down here, we were kind of already getting into kind of my wrap-up question, which is if you could all just kind of summarize, overall assessment of how the bottle bill has worked in Michigan, and any, in an ideal world, barring the difficulties of, changing a citizen-initiated law or the legislative will, in an ideal world, what would you like to see changed?
The bottle bill was the most progressive idea of 1976, and it's not evolved as well as society has in that intervening time. So what I love about the bottle bill is that in terms of materials recovery and in terms of creating that circular economy, it is the best thing going in the whole country. We can do more with more. I would like to see personally things like universal redemption, which increase the convenience for the consumer, expansion to new materials. So we know that those things that already have markets for them are getting scooped up and put back into the economy in the right way. Those are some of the easy things if we talk about just straight up expansion of the bottle bill. What I'd really like to see us engaging with our partners on, though, is how do we do the advanced recovery work? How do we really think through the evolution of that system to something that recognizes the sustainability challenges that we have currently and the strong environmental ethic that we want to uphold and expand into the future? It's really time for us to totally modernize this process. And we fortunately, in my mind, have lots of smart, big brains around. And if we can develop the political will, the resources would be there to make it happen.
I guess I'll go next. For me, it's just maybe living up to the promises that were made in 76, which is continuing to invest into a great system to make it convenient for consumers and to have everyone pulling in the same direction. We want bottles, we want our beverage containers, whatever's covered by that bottle bill. And I do believe there's opportunities to cover more with investment. But once we do it, the goal always has to be return. The goal should be 100% return. It may not be something we hit every year, but the goal should be, let's get everything back into the system and let's invest in this system and let's continue to keep it the best one in the country and keep consumer support. I was a little bit startled because I looked at kind of the data back on the poll that MLive did on return, people supported the bottle bill, and it slipped a little bit coming out of the pandemic. I don't want to see people's support slipping. I want to see that support level always in the 90% because people see it as a great value and a great return on their 10-cent loan, shall we say, their 10-cent interest-free loan that they're doing to get their container back. We want them to get their containers, to get their 10 cents, and we want the container back. We want the system to work great. That's my goal.
I'm in with all these goals. I think I would just say too, to keep, there's always room for improvement, evolution. We have continued to evolve, right? And we want to continue to evolve and get better. But we need to celebrate in Michigan on the bottle bill. Like, it is one of the recycling things we do really well. So, the idea that it's curbside or bottle bill, that's not recycling, right? We figured out one thing. So let's keep moving forward with all those targets, knowing what we've learned that works really well with the bottle bill. And let's talk about it. The state of Michigan and everybody should be really proud of, over 4 billion containers a year being recycled. That's not happening in Indiana and Ohio and other places. So I'm proud of all of us and the working together. It's a great story of, the businesses and the citizens and the government working together to figure out a great system.
Well, absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, Conan, Spencer, and Shayna. It's been a great conversation. Thanks to everyone who's been watching. If this has been of interest to you, I strongly encourage you to go watch MLive's recent short documentary about this subject, read the accompanying stories, and it's definitely one of those issues that has a lot of very interesting policy implications and a lot of different factors to consider. So we really appreciate all of you sharing your time and insight with us. And please check out the documentary here, and feel free to keep the questions and comments coming because it's something that obviously MLive is interested in hearing. So thanks again.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Thank you.